The Super Bowl is a staple in American culture. Its popularity has skyrocketed since its inception when the Green Bay Packers defeated the Kansas City Chiefs in the first ever iteration of the game. The game has since catapulted into another stratosphere. Bonafide superstars like Beyonce Knowles have been featured in the halftime show, and a 30-second TV commercial cost millions of dollars. The Super Bowl is more than a game, really. It is a multi-million-dollar event that is so meticulously planned out and deemed so important there really isn't any other sporting event to compare it to. That being said, not all Super Bowls are created equal. In terms of hype, the actual action on the field, and, of course, the drama. While Super Bowl 47 had no shortage of any of those important ingredients, and it will go down in the history books as one of the most memorable matchups in the history of the NFL. For starters, the hype machine was in full effect heading into this game. It featured the San Francisco 49ers, one of the NFL's most legendary franchises, and the Baltimore Ravens, who have had a strong following since entering the NFL back in 1996. Between its dominant defense and high-flying offense, the 49ers were electric throughout the entire season, and the Ravens had hit their stride at the perfect time and were playing unbelievable football heading into the big game. It wasn't just the brand of the franchises that had media and fans alike buzzing. The 49ers were coached by Jim Harbaugh, and the Ravens had his brother John as their head coach. This marked the first time in Super Bowl history that the game featured two brothers coaching against one another, and the media subsequently donned it the Harbaugh Bowl. The coaching matchup was far from just a novelty, too. The brothers were two of the best coaches in the league at the time, and both were as fiery and competitive as coaches come. Needless to say, this one had all the markings of a classic before a single snap was taken, and it did not disappoint. Baltimore jumped on the 49ers early and were able to build up a 28-6 lead by the third quarter. Then something happened that would launch the Harbaugh Bowl from a good Super Bowl to an all-timer. Seemingly out of nowhere, the stadium went dark. There was a power outage in the Superdome.
Welcome back to New Orleans. This is Steve Tasker, sideline reporter for the Super Bowl 47. Half the power in New Orleans Stadium, the Superdome here, is out.
Think about that. In one of the country's best football stadiums, during the most important game, there was a power outage. How insane is that? Fans at home quickly took to social media to try and figure out what in the world was going on in New Orleans, and all sorts of rumors started to fly around the internet. It seemed impossible. After about 40 minutes, the staffers at the facility were able to get the systems up and running again, and the game resumed.
So it's going to be a delay and a little excess of 34 minutes now.
Third down and 13. Let's go.
The 49ers capitalized on the stoppage and came storming all the way back, scoring 17 unanswered to cut the lead to 5 points. Unfortunately for the 49ers faithful, it was too little too late, and they ended up losing by a final score of 34-31. The Super Bowl usually has pretty thorough media coverage to begin with, but following this one, it was a whole other level of craziness. Sure, there were some questions for the brothers about the game, but there was one question that seemingly everyone needed an answer to. What caused the power outage? Yet, for some reason, it seemed like we were never going to get a straight answer. That was until Doug Thornton, the executive vice president of stadiums and arenas for the venue management entity, SMG, who has headed the operations in the Superdome since 1997, spoke up. And at long last, the public got the answer it so desperately craved as we learned the real reason there was a blackout in the Superdome during the most important game of the year. According to Thornton, it all started in the spring of 2012, about 18 months before the night in question. Representatives from Entergy, the company that supports the stadium's electrical infrastructure, reached out to the officials from the Superdome. They wanted to replace the stadium's switchgears, which are basically transformers that funnel large amounts of power into the stadium from nearby substations through 2 copper cables. Thornton claims that he didn't want to replace the cables. The tests showed that they were operating near 90% efficiency, but one of the Entergy reps was able to convince him to make the change anyways, citing a 2011 game between the Steelers and 49ers at the antiquated Candlestick Park, which featured 2 power outages. Thornton approved the replacement and millions of dollars were invested. Everything was thought to have gone smoothly, but a couple of months before the big game, glitches in the system that Thornton describes as gremlins started to appear. It got to the point that just a month before the Super Bowl, they recruited dozens of electrical consultants to come to the Superdome in the middle of the night and run a power loss simulation to see what would shut down if the power went out. The test didn't reveal any major concerns, but there was enough warning signs that they drew up a contingency plan if something were to happen during the Super Bowl. Fast forward a few weeks, it is the Wednesday before Super Bowl Sunday, and Thornton remembers going to 2 of his senior executives in a panic, telling them, "I just don't have a good feeling about this." And his premonition would prove to be justified. When just 1 minute and 38 seconds into the third quarter, a couple of the lights on the west side of the venue went out. Then the rest of the lights over the field followed and panic started to brew. The elevator stopped working with the fans trapped inside, the escalators were stationary, and none of the concession stands' POS systems were operational. Even the lights in the locker room went out. Fortunately, the emergency lights worked properly and the arena remained dimly lit. Otherwise, who knows what kind of mayhem would have transpired. While the engineers began working furiously to get the system up and running, the venue's officials began their own project, trying to figure out what exactly had gone wrong. All the while, the players were spread out on the field, stretching, tossing the football around, and basically doing whatever it took to ensure that they were ready to resume playing when the lights kicked back on. The whole scene was surreal. Thornton describes the harrowing situation well, saying, "It was so sudden, I would almost give you the analogy of an earthquake." Meanwhile, the engineers were toiling away in the stadium's electrical vault, trying to restore the power, toggling the different power levels and adjusting the power feeds. After what ended up being a 34-minute delay, the lighting was restored and play resumed on the field. Much to the chagrin of Thornton and the rest of the Superdome officials, Entergy immediately took to Twitter to deny any responsibility. The officials nervously watched the rest of the game, terrified that the lights would go out again, but fortunately they survived the night with no further issues. The icing on the cake for the Superdome's team responsible for managing the whole fiasco was that ahead of the event, they had granted an unprecedented level of access to 60 Minutes so they could show the behind-the-scenes footage of staging the Super Bowl. They filmed everything, even seemingly innocuous facets of the process, like the rehearsals and internal meetings. And then they were supposed to do a closing interview with Frank Superdome, a senior vice president of events for the NFL, who was responsible for running that year's game.
During the halftime show, it would have been in every shot. So we took that out and put it up there so that I could see it and that everybody else saw it. All right, we lost lights.
While this was probably a fun idea when it was pitched as a "look, we did it" kind of segment, I'm sure having the camera crew there, taping as they attempted to navigate the most trying of circumstances, only added to the stress. The end result was the longest segment in the history of 60-minute sports at over 32 minutes. Despite the fact that the segment really didn't show the staffers in a negative light at all, Thornton said he still has never watched it. "Imagine having a bad day at the office," he says, "then imagine having your worst day at the office and 60 Minutes is standing to your left. Yeah, I think I'd be good on watching that too." In the aftermath of the frenzy, everyone and their mother had a theory on what had happened. Some believed that a terror attack had been thwarted. Some people chalked it up to just a basic electrical failure. Even the players chimed in, and the Ravens, who nearly blew a huge lead following the power outage, were quick to put on their tinfoil hats and claim that there must have been a greater conspiracy at play. Of all people, Ray Lewis was the first person to toss one out there. True to form, he made a wildly hypocritical and contradictory statement, which began with him saying he wasn't going to accuse nobody of nothing before he continued to accuse the NFL of intentionally tampering with the lights to slow their momentum. "You're a zillion-dollar company and your lights go out? No way," he added. "You cannot tell me somebody wasn't sitting there and when they said the Ravens are about to blow them out and they didn't say, 'Man, we better do something.'" Leave it to Ray Lewis, who was essentially given a free pass by the NFL for his transgressions, to hypothesize that the same league was out to get them. It just wasn't Lewis, though. Just a month later, fellow linebacker Terrell Suggs echoed a similar statement, but Suggs had an individual culprit in mind, none other than Roger Goodell. "I thought he had a hand in it," Suggs said. "Most definitely he had a hand in it." While visualizing Goodell in a lair-like control room as he dramatically cuts the lights in fear that the game was going to be a blowout is quite an entertaining example, apparently that wasn't the case. Who would have thought? So if it wasn't Goodell and it wasn't an orchestrated attack, what caused the lights in a multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art facility to cut out during its most important event of the year? Dr. John A. Palmer of Palmer Engineering and Forensics, an industry expert, was brought in as a third-party consultant to analyze the scene and report on what he had found. His work culminated in a 15-page investigative report that came out in March. The report itself was super technical and, well, nerdy to be honest. But the findings were interesting. It turns out that the switchgears that Entergy installed ahead of the Super Bowl contained a device called a relay, which was supposed to shut down the power supply if either of the power feeds reached a certain level. The problem arose because the factory settings on the device were too low for the amount of power that the Superdome can handle. So when the amperage spiked past the predetermined limit, it killed the power, meaning it wasn't necessarily anyone's fault. They were taking proper safety precautions, they just sort of miscalculated just how much power that they were going to have flushing through the system. It seems like someone along the chain of command probably should have been running quality control on this whole process, but at this point, we'll never know exactly whose responsibility it was. But if you ask me, that's okay. Superdome and Thornton ended up rallying their team through the crisis. They were able to mitigate what could have really been a disaster. Thornton, however, does not appear to share that sentiment. He was apparently pretty traumatized by the whole situation, and he just wishes that he could forget the whole thing happened. Superdome has a little bit of a different perspective on the situation. He turned the mishap into a positive and has worked it into a talk he now gives as a special events consultant titled, "What Do You Do When Things Go Wrong?" I guess depending on your fandom and role in the whole situation, your opinion on the near catastrophe would vary, but I think everyone involved would be in agreement on one thing: that was a Super Bowl for the ages. If you're new here and you haven't subscribed yet, now's a great time to click the subscribe button down below. If you liked the video, then like the video, we'd really appreciate it. And last but not least, don't forget to tune in to TPS every single day for more cool videos.